I've never told anyone this, but I once watched a man's entire life collapse in the span of 30 seconds. It happened at Seattle International Airport on a Tuesday afternoon. The man, let's call him Jackson, stood there in his $3,000 suit, his trophy girlfriend by his side, waiting to finalize his divorce from the woman who'd abandoned him years earlier. He thought he was about to have his moment of sweet revenge, flying his ex in just to make her sign papers, putting her up in a mediocre hotel, showing off his new life, all carefully orchestrated to say, "Look what you missed out on when you left me." But then she walked through those arrival gates, and she wasn't alone. Two small children held her hands, twins about 5 years old. The boy had Jackson's eyes, the girl had his smile, and in that moment, I watched as the revenge fantasy he'd spent years crafting shattered into a million pieces. You think you know where this story is going, don't you? Trust me, you don't, because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about pride, forgiveness, and the price we pay for the stories we tell ourselves. Jackson Hargrove had it all figured out. At least that's what he told himself as his sleek black Bentley pulled up to the curb outside Seattle International's main terminal. He checked his watch, a Patek Philippe that cost more than most people's cars, and adjusted his custom suit jacket. These little rituals had become second nature since his fortune had multiplied over the past 6 years. "Are you absolutely sure you want me here for this?" Vivian asked from the seat beside him. Her manicured fingers lightly touched his arm, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the afternoon light. She wasn't just his girlfriend of 8 months. Today, she was a prop in his carefully staged production. "Absolutely," Jackson replied with that boardroom confidence that had become his trademark. "It's just paperwork. Amara signs we're officially done, and we'll still make our dinner reservation at Canlis by 8. But Vivian wasn't buying it. Something in her eyes told me she knew exactly what this was. A victory lap. A chance for Jackson to show his ex-wife what she'd missed out on when she walked away 6 years ago. The truth was more complicated than Jackson would ever admit, even to himself. This meeting wasn't just about finalizing divorce papers that had been sitting in legal limbo for years. It was about closure, vindication, and yes, a carefully orchestrated moment of revenge. 6 years earlier, Amara had walked out when Jackson's first company was falling apart. Creditors were calling daily. The stress had hollowed him out, turned him into someone he barely recognized. She'd left without explanation, just a note saying she couldn't do this anymore. The timing couldn't have been worse. The woman he'd supported through nursing school, whose dreams he'd championed even when his own were crumbling, had abandoned him at his lowest moment. But now he was worth 9 figures. Now he had the power to fly her in from wherever she'd been hiding, put her up in a decent but deliberately unimpressive hotel, and have her sign the papers that would officially end their marriage. He wanted her to see exactly what she'd walked away from, the wealth, the status, the life she could have shared. The arrivals board showed her flight had landed 20 minutes ago. Jackson positioned himself strategically where she would have to walk past him to exit. Vivian stood beside him, elegant in a cream designer dress that complemented her fair complexion and blonde hair, a striking contrast to Amara's rich brown skin and natural curls. Flight 1857 from Atlanta now arriving. The announcement echoed through the terminal. Atlanta. So that's where she'd gone, back to her hometown. While he'd been rebuilding his life in Seattle, she'd returned to familiar ground. Jackson felt a tightening in his chest. Had she found someone new? Had she finished her nursing degree? Had she thought of him at all? Passengers began streaming through the gate. Business travelers with their compact luggage. Tourists with oversized backpacks. A family reuniting with tearful grandparents. Then he saw her. Amara's face hadn't changed much. Still those high cheekbones. Still that determined set to her jaw. Her hair was different. Shorter now with honey-colored highlights framing her face. But it wasn't her appearance that made Jackson's carefully constructed facade crack. It was the 2 small children walking beside her. A boy and a girl, perhaps 5 years old, each holding one of Amara's hands. The boy wore a blue dinosaur t-shirt and bounced with each step. The girl, slightly taller, had her hair in neat braids adorned with colorful beads that clicked softly as she walked. Jackson's mind refused to process what he was seeing. Maybe they were her sister's kids. Maybe she was babysitting for a friend. Maybe, but as they drew closer, the truth became undeniable. The boy had Jackson's eyes, that unusual hazel color that had come from his mother. The girl had his smile, the slight dimple on the right cheek that had been passed down through 3 generations of Hargroves. Beside him, Vivian stiffened. "Jackson?" she whispered, but he couldn't respond. Amara spotted him and faltered mid-step. The children looked up at her, then followed her gaze to the tall man standing frozen in the middle of the terminal. "Mommy, is that him?" the little girl asked, her voice carrying clearly across the space between them. Amara nodded, her expression a complex mixture of defiance and apprehension. "Yes, Zuri, that's him." Jackson felt the ground shift beneath him. The carefully orchestrated moment of triumph he'd planned dissolved into confusion and disbelief. "Amara," he managed, his voice barely audible over the airport announcements. "What is this?" She approached slowly, the children still holding her hands. "This is Zuri," she said, nodding to the girl. "And this is Jabari." The boy regarded Jackson with curious eyes, his eyes. "They're 5 years old." The math wasn't difficult. 5 years. She'd left 6 years ago. "You were pregnant," he said flatly. It wasn't a question. "I didn't know when I left," Amara replied, her voice steady but quiet. "I found out 2 months later." "And you didn't think to tell me?" The anger rising in his voice made both children press closer to their mother. "You had already moved on, Jackson. You made that very clear." Vivian shifted uncomfortably beside him. "I should give you privacy for this," she murmured, but Jackson barely registered her words. "Moved on," he repeated incredulously. "You left me when my company was failing, when I was about to lose everything." Amara's eyes flashed. "Is that what you've been telling yourself all these years? That I abandoned you because of money?" The children were looking back and forth between the adults, sensing the tension. The boy, Jabari, tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mommy, I'm hungry." Amara immediately softened her expression. "We'll get something soon, baby." She looked back at Jackson. This isn't the place for this conversation. He knew she was right, but the shock had stripped away his usual strategic thinking. "Where are you staying?" "The Westlake Hotel. Room 412. Of course, the mid-range hotel he'd arranged. The one that was meant to be part of his statement about their different stations in life now seemed petty and small. "I'll have my driver take you," he said, gesturing toward the exit where his Bentley waited. "We can take a taxi," Amara replied firmly. "Please," Jackson said, surprising himself with the genuine note in his voice. "It's the least I can do." Amara hesitated, then nodded. "Fine." As they walked toward the exit, Vivian touched Jackson's arm. "I'll catch a ride back to the city," she said quietly. "Call me when you've sorted this out." He nodded absently, his attention fixed on the 2 small figures walking ahead of him. Children with his blood, his features, his legacy. Children whose existence he'd been completely unaware of until this moment. "I've seen a lot of powerful men in my time, but I've never seen one look as lost as Jackson did walking through that airport. All that careful planning, all that practiced confidence. Gone in an instant, and in its place, pure, unfiltered shock. The drive to the hotel was tense and quiet. The children, sensing the strange atmosphere, remained unusually subdued. Occasionally, Jabari would point out something through the window. A tall building, a colorful billboard, and Amara would respond with gentle encouragement. Jackson watched them interact, noting the easy affection between mother and children. They were well-behaved, articulate for their age. She had done a good job raising them without him. At the hotel, Jackson instructed his driver to wait. The suite he'd booked for Amara was modest by his standards but spacious enough for a family. As they entered, the children immediately explored the room with excitement. "2 beds, Mommy. And look at the TV," Jabari exclaimed, bouncing on one of the queen-sized mattresses. "Careful, Jay," Amara cautioned, setting down their carry-on luggage. She turned to Jackson, who stood awkwardly by the door. They need to eat something. We can talk after. Jackson nodded. I'll order room service. While they waited for the food, Jackson observed the family routine he'd had no part in creating. Amara helped the children wash their hands. She knew exactly how Zuri liked her water, room temperature, no ice, and that Jabari preferred to use his own special cup from his backpack. These were the intimate details of parenthood he'd missed entirely. After the food arrived and the children were settled at the small table with their chicken fingers and fruit, Amara finally turned her full attention to Jackson. You said you didn't know you were pregnant when you left, he began, keeping his voice low. I didn't, she confirmed. I was stressed, not sleeping. I thought the missed period was from that. And when you found out? Amara's eyes held his steadily. You had already sent me the message that it was over. What message? You're the one who left a note and disappeared. She shook her head slowly. I left because I found the texts, Jackson, between you and Melanie from your office. I saw the hotel receipts. The accusation hit him like a physical blow. That wasn't. Don't. She cut him off. I saw enough to know what was happening. And when I confronted you about the late nights, the distance between us, you made me feel crazy for questioning you. Jackson fell silent. The affair with Melanie had been brief, a foolish response to the stress of his failing business. He'd ended it before Amara left, but he'd never admitted it had happened. When I discovered I was pregnant, Amara continued, I called you 3 times. Your assistant said you were unavailable. The 4th time, she told me you'd instructed her not to put my calls through anymore. Jackson remembered giving that instruction, believing it was the only way to move forward after the pain of her abandonment. He hadn't known she was trying to tell him something so important. I made a choice then, Amara said. I decided my children deserved better than a father who didn't want their mother. So I built a life for us in Atlanta. I finished my nursing degree. I worked night shifts while my mother watched them. I did everything I could to give them stability. Across the room, Zuri laughed at something her brother said, the sound bright and innocent against the weight of the adult conversation. They know about you, Amara added quietly. I never lied to them. I told them their father was a businessman who lived far away. I showed them pictures of you from when we were together. Jackson felt something crack inside him, a fissure in the narrative he'd constructed over the years. He'd cast himself as the victim of abandonment, but the reality was more complicated. They had both made mistakes. They had both caused pain. Why did you agree to come now? He asked. After all this time? Amara glanced at the children, then back to him. They're asking more questions as they get older. About you, about why they don't see you. I thought. She hesitated. I thought maybe it was time they met you, even if it was just once. So when your lawyer contacted me about finalizing the divorce, I decided to bring them. Jackson looked at the twins, his children, with new awareness. They had his blood, his heritage, his future. For years, he'd focused on building wealth, on proving his worth through material success. But sitting in this hotel room, watching these 2 small humans who carried his features, he felt the hollowness of that achievement. I want to know them, he said suddenly, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. Amara studied him carefully. This isn't a game, Jackson. They're not business assets or status symbols. They're children who can be hurt. I know that, he replied, a hint of his old defensiveness returning. Then more softly, I know. I've missed 5 years already. Daddy. The small voice startled them both. Zuri had approached without either adult noticing. She stood looking up at Jackson with curious eyes. Are you our daddy? Jackson felt his throat tighten. He knelt down to her level, suddenly aware of how small she was, how fragile. Yes, he said simply. I am. Zuri considered this information with the serious contemplation only a 5-year-old could muster. Mommy said you build big buildings. Sometimes, Jackson replied. My company builds lots of different things. Can you build a castle? Jabari had joined his sister, his eyes, Jackson's eyes, wide with possibility. Despite everything, Jackson felt a smile form. I've never built a castle before, But maybe we could try. With a dragon? Jabari pressed, warming to the idea. Dragons are scary, Zuri objected. Not all dragons, Jackson found himself saying. Some dragons protect the castle. The children debated this point with increasing animation while Jackson and Amara watched, both aware of the surreal nature of the moment. These children, their children, were meeting their father for the first time, and their concerns were castles and dragons, not the complicated history between their parents. I've been watching people long enough to know when someone's world is being remade right before my eyes. Jackson Hargrove, the man who'd planned a revenge scenario down to the last detail, was now sitting cross-legged on a hotel room floor, using the room service napkins to sketch a castle with protective dragons while his children leaned against his shoulders. The dragon needs more fire, Jabari insisted, pointing to Jackson's drawing. And a crown, added Zuri. She's a queen dragon. Jackson obliged, adding flames and a small crown. His expensive watch caught the light as he drew, and I couldn't help but notice how out of place it looked next to the children's plastic digital watches. Souvenirs from some Atlanta aquarium, judging by the dolphin designs. Amara watched from the small table by the window, her expression guarded but softening around the edges. This wasn't how any of them had expected the day to unfold. It's getting late, she said eventually. You two need baths before bed. The twins protested, as children do, but Amara's gentle firmness won out. Jackson stood awkwardly, unsure of his place in this family routine. I should probably go, he said, though everything in him wanted to stay, to learn more about these children who had appeared so suddenly in his life. You could come back tomorrow, Amara suggested, surprising them both. We're here for 3 days. Jackson nodded, relief washing over him. I'd like that. As he gathered his things to leave, Jabari ran up and wrapped his arms around Jackson's legs in an impulsive hug. Bye, Daddy. Don't forget about the castle. The word Daddy hit Jackson like a physical force. He placed a tentative hand on his son's head. I won't forget. Zuri approached more cautiously, studying him with eyes that seemed too wise for her years. Will you really come back tomorrow? The question carried weight beyond her understanding. It wasn't just about tomorrow, it was about all the tomorrows that would follow. Yes, Jackson said firmly. I promise. As he walked to the elevator, Jackson pulled out his phone to call his driver. There were 3 missed calls from Vivian. He hesitated, then put the phone back in his pocket without returning them. Whatever conversation they needed to have could wait. Right now, his mind was too full of castles and dragons and promises he intended to keep. Back in his penthouse overlooking Elliott Bay, Jackson poured himself a scotch and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows. The Seattle skyline glittered against the night, the Space Needle illuminated like a beacon. 6 years ago, when Amara left, he'd been living in a cramped apartment in Belltown, struggling to keep his first company afloat. Now he owned the top 2 floors of one of the most exclusive buildings in the city. He'd built all this, the wealth, the success, the reputation, partly to prove her wrong, to show that she'd made a mistake in leaving him. And now he discovered that while he'd been constructing buildings and amassing fortune, she'd been raising his children. His phone buzzed again. Vivian. This time he answered. Jackson, what's going on? Are you okay? Her voice carried genuine concern. I'm fine, he said, though he wasn't sure that was true. It's complicated. Those children, they're yours, aren't they? Yes. A long pause followed. Did you know? No. The single word carried the weight of 5 lost years. Do you want to talk about it? Jackson considered the question. Did he want to talk about it? Could he even find the words to explain how it felt to discover you were a father to 2 5-year-olds you'd never met? Not tonight, he said finally. I need some time. I understand. Her voice was measured, careful. Call me when you're ready. After they hung up, Jackson sat in the dark, his scotch untouched. On the coffee table lay the divorce papers his lawyer had prepared, the documents that were supposed to be signed tomorrow, officially ending his connection to Amara. Now they seemed like artifacts from another life, one that no longer existed. He picked up his laptop and did something he hadn't done in years. He searched for Amara online. Her social media profiles were private, but her professional information was public. She'd completed her nursing degree and now worked at Emory University Hospital in Atlanta. There were mentions of community service, a nursing excellence award. What he didn't find were any pictures of the twins. She'd kept them protected from the digital world, away from the eyes of strangers, including, he realized with a pang, their father. Jackson closed the laptop and finally took a sip of his scotch. The burn in his throat matched the ache in his chest. 5 years. He'd missed their birth, their first words, their first steps. He'd missed bedtime stories and scraped knees and Christmas mornings. And for what? To prove a point? To nurse his wounded pride? The next morning, Jackson woke early. He'd barely slept, his mind racing with questions and possibilities. He showered and dressed more casually than usual, jeans and a button-down rather than his typical suit. Today wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about connecting with his children. On the way to the hotel, he stopped at a toy store that had just opened. The young clerk looked surprised to see such an early customer, especially one who seemed so out of place among the stuffed animals and building blocks. "Can I help you find something?" she asked. Jackson hesitated. "I need something for twins. A boy and a girl. 5 years old. Special occasion?" "Yes," he said after a moment. "Very special." He left with a Lego castle building set for Jabari and a stuffed dragon, purple, with a small crown, for Zuri. The gifts felt simultaneously inadequate and too much. How did you make up for 5 years with plastic bricks and plush toys? When he arrived at the hotel, he found Amara and the twins in the small breakfast area off the lobby. Jabari spotted him first, waving enthusiastically with a syrup-sticky hand. "Daddy, you came back." The other hotel guests glanced over with mild curiosity, but Jackson barely noticed. He was too focused on the way Jabari's face lit up at his arrival, on the cautious smile Zuri offered from behind her glass of orange juice. "I promised, didn't I?" Jackson said, sliding into the empty chair at their table. He placed the shopping bag by his feet, deciding to save the gifts for later. "We're having pancakes," Zuri informed him solemnly. "With blueberries. That sounds delicious. Do you want some?" Jabari pushed his plate toward Jackson, offering to share with the easy generosity of childhood. "Thank you, but I already ate." It was a lie, he'd been too nervous to eat anything, but the gesture touched him deeply. Amara watched this interaction with guarded eyes. "We were thinking of visiting the aquarium today," she said. "The kids have been talking about it since I told them we were coming to Seattle. It was an invitation, though a cautious one." "I'd love to join you," Jackson replied. "If that's okay." Amara nodded. "That's why I mentioned it." The Seattle Aquarium on a weekday morning wasn't crowded. The twins ran ahead to each exhibit, pressing their faces against the glass to watch colorful fish dart through coral formations. Jackson and Amara followed at a more measured pace, maintaining a careful distance between them. "They're amazing," Jackson said, watching as Zuri explained something to her brother with the authority of an older sister, though they were the same age. "You've done an incredible job with them." "It hasn't been easy," Amara admitted. "My mom helped a lot, especially when they were babies and I was finishing school. But yes, they are amazing." "I want to help," Jackson said. "Financially, of course, but also, I want to be in their lives. If you'll let me." Amara stopped walking and turned to face him directly. "Why should I believe you, Jackson? Yesterday you flew me here to finalize our divorce and, let's be honest, to show off how successful you've become without me. Now suddenly you want to be father of the year." Her words stung, but they weren't unfair. "I know how it looks," he acknowledged. "And you're right about why I brought you here. I wanted closure. I wanted—" He trailed off. "Revenge," Amara finished for him. "You wanted me to see what I'd given up." Jackson couldn't deny it. "Yes. And now I see what I've given up." He looked toward the twins, who were now watching sea otters float on their backs, cracking shells on their stomachs. "I've missed so much already. I don't want to miss any more." Amara's expression softened slightly. "It's not that simple, Jackson. Our lives are in Atlanta. Yours is here. The twins have school, friends, routines. They need stability. I understand that. I'm not asking you to uproot their lives. But there are ways to make this work. I can fly to Atlanta regularly. They can visit during school breaks. We can figure it out. And what about your girlfriend? The one from the airport? Jackson hesitated. Vivian and I. That's complicated right now. Everything's complicated right now, Amara pointed out. Before Jackson could respond, Jabari came running back to them. Daddy, come see the sharks. They're huge. The conversation paused as Jackson allowed himself to be pulled toward the shark exhibit, Jabari's small hand warm in his. Zuri joined them, less exuberant but equally interested in showing her father the hammerhead shark circling in the large tank. Their heads look like hammers, she explained seriously. That's why they're called that. Is that so? Jackson replied, equally serious. Thank you for teaching me. Zuri beamed at being taken seriously, and something in Jackson's chest tightened. How many moments like this had he missed? How many small discoveries and proud explanations? As they moved through the aquarium, Jackson found himself relaxing into a role he'd never expected to play. He lifted Jabari onto his shoulders to see the top of the jellyfish tank. He listened attentively as Zuri read the information plaques with careful precision, sounding out the longer words. He bought them stuffed sea otters from the gift shop, ignoring Amara's protests that it was too much. Please, he said quietly, while the twins were distracted by a display of colorful keychains. Let me do this small thing. Amara relented, but as they left the aquarium, she pulled him aside while the children examined a street performer's bubble display nearby. This isn't just about toys and fun outings, Jackson. Being a parent means being there for the hard stuff too. The tantrums, the nightmares, the fevers at 3 a.m. It's showing up consistently, not just when it's convenient. I know, Jackson said, and I want all of it. The good and the bad. Amara studied his face, searching for sincerity. We'll see, she said finally. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. It was the cautious response of a mother who had spent 5 years protecting her children from disappointment. They spent the rest of the day exploring Pike Place Market. The twins were fascinated by the fishmongers tossing salmon through the air, squealing with delight each time a fish flew from one worker to another. They sampled fresh berries and artisan cheese, wandered through shops filled with handmade crafts, and watched street musicians perform. Jackson observed how Amara mothered, firm but gentle, attentive without hovering. She knew when Jabari needed a snack before he even complained of hunger. She anticipated Zuri's sensory overload in the crowded market and found a quiet corner for them to rest. These were the instincts he'd never had the chance to develop. By late afternoon, the twins were showing signs of fatigue. Jabari was less bouncy, and Zuri had grown quiet, leaning against her mother's side. We should head back to the hotel, Amara said. They need some downtime before dinner. Jackson nodded, trying to hide his disappointment. He wasn't ready for the day to end. I could bring dinner to your room later, he suggested. Give you all a chance to rest. Amara considered this. That would be nice, actually. Around 6. Perfect. As they walked back toward the hotel, Jabari's steps grew slower. Without thinking, Jackson scooped him up and settled him on his shoulders. The boy's small hands rested on top of Jackson's head, and after a moment, Jackson felt Jabari's weight shift as he leaned forward, resting his cheek against his father's hair. Something primal and protective surged through Jackson. This small person, his son, trusted him enough to rest against him, to let his guard down completely. It was a gift he hadn't earned but desperately wanted to deserve. Zuri watched this with thoughtful eyes, then reached up and slipped her hand into Jackson's. The three of them walked like that, connected, while Amara observed with an expression Jackson couldn't quite read. Back at the hotel, Jackson reluctantly said goodbye, promising to return with dinner. In the elevator down to the lobby, he leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. 24 hours ago, his biggest concern had been making sure Amara saw how successful he'd become without her. Now his entire world had shifted on its axis. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. Emergency meeting with Tokyo investors at 5. Can't reschedule. Jackson stared at the message. 6 months of work had gone into wooing these investors. The deal would add millions to his company's value. Yesterday, nothing would have kept him from that meeting. Today, he typed, "Handle it without me. Family emergency." His assistant's response was immediate. "Everything okay?" Jackson smiled slightly. "Better than okay," he replied. "I'll explain tomorrow." At precisely 6 o'clock, Jackson returned to the hotel with bags of food from his favorite Italian restaurant. He'd remembered that Amara loved their mushroom ravioli, and he'd ordered a variety of dishes, unsure of what the twins might like. Zuri opened the door, her hair freshly braided and damp from a bath. "Daddy's here with food," she called over her shoulder. "Daddy." The word still hit him like a physical force each time they said it. The hotel room had been transformed in his absence. The twins had arranged their stuffed animals. The sea otters from the aquarium, the dragon he'd brought this morning, and others they'd brought from home. In a semicircle on one of the beds, Jabari had built a structure from hotel notepads and pens that he proudly announced was the beginning of our castle. "I saved the Lego set for when we get home," Amara explained quietly. "It was too much to open here in the hotel." Home. Atlanta. The reality of their separate lives reasserted itself. They ate dinner picnic style on the floor, the twins chattering about their favorite parts of the day. Jabari loved the sharks best. Zuri couldn't stop talking about the sea otters. They asked Jackson questions about his life. Did he have pets? No, but he'd had a dog growing up. Could he swim? Yes, though not as well as the otters. Did he like pizza? Who doesn't? Simple questions with simple answers, building the foundation of knowing each other. After dinner, as the twins got ready for bed, Jackson helped clean up the takeout containers. He and Amara moved around each other carefully, the familiar intimacy of their past making this domestic task feel both natural and strange. "Thank you for today," he said quietly. "For letting me be part of it." Amara nodded. They had a good time. "And you?" She paused, a container of leftover pasta in her hands. "It's complicated, Jackson. Seeing you with them, it's what I always imagined when I found out I was pregnant. But then reality set in. I would have been there if I'd known," he said, needing her to believe this. "Would you?" Her gaze was direct, challenging. "You were so angry after I left, and I was hurt by what I'd discovered. We both said things, did things. I made mistakes," Jackson admitted. "The affair with Melanie, it was brief and meaningless, but that doesn't excuse it. The stress of the business failing, I was losing myself. But I never stopped loving you." Amara set down the container. "Don't, Jackson. This isn't about us getting back together. This is about what's best for Zuri and Jabari." "I know," he said quickly. "I'm not suggesting. I just want you to know that I regret how things ended. And if I'd known about the pregnancy, nothing would have kept me from being involved." Before Amara could respond, the twins emerged from the bathroom in matching pajamas. Blue with dinosaurs for Jabari, purple with stars for Zuri. "Story time," Jabari announced, climbing onto one of the beds. Amara looked at Jackson. "Would you like to read to them tonight?" The offer felt monumental, a small but significant piece of the parenting ritual being shared with him. "I'd love to." The twins had brought a well-worn copy of Where the Wild Things Are from home. Jackson sat between them on the bed, the book open on his lap. As he read, he found himself doing the voices, growing more animated with each page. The twins giggled at his wild thing roars, and even Amara smiled from her seat by the window. When the story ended, Jabari yawned widely. "One more." "Not tonight, buddy," Amara said gently. "It's already past your bedtime." The twins protested mildly, but were clearly fighting to keep their eyes open after the excitement of the day. Jackson stood, unsure of the bedtime protocol. "Good night hug," Jabari asked, arms outstretched. Jackson embraced his son, breathing in the clean scent of hotel shampoo and something indefinably childlike. "Good night, Jabari. I'll see you tomorrow." Zuri was next, her hug more reserved but no less precious. "Don't forget about us when we go home," she whispered, so quietly that only Jackson could hear. Her words pierced him. Never, he promised, his voice rough with emotion. I could never forget you. After tucking them in and turning off the main lights, leaving only the bathroom light on as a nightlight, Jackson and Amara stepped into the hallway for a moment of privacy. They're worried I'll disappear from their lives, Jackson said, still shaken by Zuri's whispered fear. Amara sighed. They've known about you their whole lives, but you've been more of a story than a real person. Now that they've met you, they're afraid of losing you. I won't let that happen. Jackson. Amara's voice was gentle but firm. We live in Atlanta. You're here in Seattle. Your whole life is here. Your company, your girlfriend, everything you've built. Things can change, he said. Companies can be run from anywhere. Relationships. He trailed off, thinking of Vivian. He hadn't spoken to her since last night, hadn't even thought about her much today. What did that say about their relationship? Let's not make any big decisions right now, Amara suggested. We're all emotional. Let's take some time to think about what makes sense for everyone. Jackson nodded, though everything in him wanted to solve this immediately, to find the perfect solution that would keep his children in his life. You're right, but I meant what I said. I want to be part of their lives. A real part, not just holiday visits and phone calls. I believe you, Amara said, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Jackson felt like maybe she did. Back in his penthouse that night, Jackson sat at his desk with a legal pad, making lists. Options for involvement in the twins' lives. Potential travel schedules. Ideas for making his business more location flexible. The practical problems seemed solvable when broken down into action items. But the emotional landscape was more complicated. His phone showed more missed calls from Vivian. He needed to talk to her to explain, but what would he say? That in the span of 24 hours, his entire life had been reoriented around two small people he hadn't known existed? And what about Amara? Seeing her with the twins, witnessing the life she'd built without him, had stirred feelings he thought were long buried. But she'd made it clear. This wasn't about them rekindling their relationship. This was about the children. Jackson set down his pen and walked to the windows. The Seattle skyline sparkled back at him, the familiar view suddenly seeming less important than it had yesterday. Success, wealth, status. He'd pursued them relentlessly since Amara left, using them to fill the void she'd left behind. But they'd never quite fit, never quite satisfied. Now he understood why. The void wasn't just about losing Amara. It was about the family they might have been, the father he never got to become. Until now. The next morning, Jackson arrived at the hotel earlier than planned. He found Amara alone in the breakfast area, a cup of coffee in front of her. The kids are still sleeping, she explained. Yesterday wore them out. Jackson sat across from her, ordering coffee from a passing server. I've been thinking about how to make this work. Amara raised an eyebrow. I thought we agreed to take some time. We did, but... Jackson leaned forward. I don't want to waste any more time. I've already missed 5 years. And what brilliant solution have you come up with? There was a hint of the old sharpness in her tone, the wariness that had characterized their interactions since she arrived. I want to open an office in Atlanta, Jackson said. My company has been looking to expand to the East Coast anyway. It makes business sense, and it would allow me to be there regularly. I could get a place nearby, be involved in school activities, weekend visits. We could work out a schedule that gives them stability but lets me be a real presence in their lives. Amara looked surprised. You've thought this through. I have. And before you ask, yes, I'm serious. This isn't an impulsive decision. The East Coast expansion has been on the table for months. I was considering Boston or New York, but Atlanta makes just as much sense. And what about your life here? Your girlfriend? Jackson hesitated. Vivian and we need to talk. But regardless of what happens with her, my priority is clear now. It's Zuri and Jabari. Amara studied him, her expression thoughtful. You've changed. Having your entire worldview shifted in 30 seconds at an airport will do that to you, Jackson replied with a small smile. For the first time since she'd arrived, Amara smiled back. A real smile that reached her eyes. I remember when you were like this. Before the business took over everything. Before we lost each other. The moments stretched between them, fragile and loaded with history. Then Amara straightened, her practical nature reasserting itself. If you're serious about Atlanta, we need to discuss what that looks like. Boundaries, expectations, schedules. The twins need consistency. Absolutely, Jackson agreed. Whatever it takes to make this work for them. They spent the next hour outlining a preliminary plan. Jackson would visit Atlanta within the next 2 weeks to scout office locations and look at housing options. They would start with weekend visits, gradually increasing his involvement as the twins adjusted. They discussed schools, activities, medical information, all the practical details of the children's lives that Jackson had missed. There's something else, Amara said as they finished their second cups of coffee. The divorce papers. Jackson had almost forgotten the original purpose of this meeting. The manila envelope sat untouched in his briefcase, suddenly irrelevant to the new reality they were navigating. What do you want to do about them? He asked. Amara considered the question. I think we should put them on hold. Not because I'm suggesting we get back together, she added quickly, but because our situation has changed dramatically. We should take time to figure out our new normal before making any legal decisions. Jackson nodded, relief washing over him. The divorce had been his idea, a way to finally sever the connection that had haunted him for years. Now that connection was the most important thing in his life. I agree, he said. Let's focus on the twins for now. The paperwork can wait. As if summoned by the mention of them, Jabari's voice called from across the lobby. Daddy, you're here already. The twins raced toward their table, still in their pajamas, with a harried-looking hotel employee following behind them. I'm so sorry, the young woman said to Amara. They said they saw their dad and just took off. It's fine, Amara assured her. Thank you for following them. Jackson found himself with a lap full of excited 5-year-old as Jabari climbed up without hesitation. Zuri was more reserved, standing beside him but beaming. We thought you might not come today, she admitted. I promised I would, Jackson reminded her gently. And I keep my promises. Zuri nodded solemnly. That's what Mommy said too. Jackson glanced at Amara, surprised. She shrugged slightly, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. I told them you were a man of your word, that if you said you'd be here, you would be. The trust implicit in that statement. After everything they'd been through, after the years of silence and hurt, felt like a gift he hadn't earned but desperately wanted to deserve. Thank you, he said quietly. Amara nodded, understanding the depth of his gratitude. They need to get dressed before breakfast, she said, standing. Come on, you two. Pancakes after pajamas. As the twins reluctantly followed their mother back to the elevator, Jabari turned and waved. Don't leave, Daddy. We'll be super fast. I'll be right here, Jackson promised. And he meant it. Not just for today, but for all the days to come. True to their word, the twins returned in record time, dressed and ready for the day. Jabari's dinosaur t-shirt was on backward, and Zuri's braids were slightly mussed, but their excitement was palpable. They slid into chairs at the table, eyes wide with anticipation. What are we doing today, Daddy? Jabari asked, reaching for the syrup as a server placed pancakes in front of him. Jackson looked to Amara, deferring to her plans. This was still her trip, her time with the children. He was just grateful to be included. Well, Amara said, helping Zuri cut her pancakes. We're flying home tomorrow afternoon, so today is our last full day in Seattle. The twins' faces fell at this reminder. Zuri's lower lip trembled slightly. But, Amara continued, I was thinking we could visit the Children's Museum this morning, and then maybe Daddy has some ideas for the afternoon. Jackson seized the opening. Actually, I do have an idea. It's a surprise, though. This immediately captured the twins' attention. What kind of surprise? Zuri asked, suspicion and excitement warring in her expression. If I told you, it wouldn't be a surprise, Jackson replied with a wink. But I think you'll both like it. The Children's Museum kept the twins enthralled all morning. They painted at the art station, built elaborate structures in the block area, and performed an impromptu puppet show with Jackson as their only audience. Amara watched from a nearby bench, her expression softening as she observed Jackson's wholehearted participation in their play. "You're good with them," she said when he sat beside her during a brief lull. The twins were currently engrossed in a water table experiment, their sleeves rolled up as they created elaborate channels and dams. "They make it easy," Jackson replied. "They're amazing kids, Amara. You've done an incredible job." She accepted the compliment with a nod. "It hasn't always been easy. There were nights I was so exhausted I cried while folding laundry. Days when I wondered if I was making the right choices for them. But they've been worth every hard moment." Jackson felt the familiar pang of regret for all he'd missed. "I wish I'd been there to help." "I know," Amara said simply, and somehow that acknowledgement without accusation or bitterness meant everything. After lunch at a child-friendly cafe near the museum, it was time for Jackson's surprise. He directed his driver to take them to a marina on Lake Union, where a private boat was waiting. "We're going on a boat?" Jabari's eyes widened with excitement. "Not just any boat," Jackson explained as they approached the dock. "This one has a special mission." The vessel was a mid-sized tour boat, usually used for small group excursions. Jackson had chartered it that morning with specific instructions. The captain, a weathered man named Mike, greeted them warmly. "All ready for our dragon hunt?" he asked the twins with a serious expression. "Dragon hunt," Zuri repeated, looking from the captain to Jackson. "Lake dragons," Jackson explained, maintaining a straight face. "They're very rare and shy, but Captain Mike knows where they like to hide." The twins exchanged glances, clearly trying to determine if this was real or pretend. That magical space between belief and skepticism that only exists in childhood. "Do they breathe fire?" Jabari asked cautiously. "Water dragons breathe bubbles, not fire," Captain Mike explained. "Fire and water don't mix, you know?" This logic seemed to satisfy Jabari. Zuri remained skeptical but intrigued as they boarded the boat. Once they were settled with life jackets securely fastened, the boat pulled away from the dock. Captain Mike narrated their journey, pointing out landmarks along the shore while weaving in fantastical details about dragon habitats and behaviors. The twins listened with rapt attention, their eyes scanning the water for any sign of mythical creatures. Jackson had arranged for dragon sightings throughout the trip, subtle bubbles in the water, mysterious shadows beneath the surface, and finally, the piece de resistance. A local diving club member in a partial dragon costume who surfaced briefly near a secluded cove, waved at the astonished children, then disappeared back into the depths. The twins' screams of excitement could probably be heard across the lake. "A dragon! A real dragon!" Jabari jumped up and down, nearly toppling over before Amara steadied him. "Did you see it, Mommy? Did you see it, Daddy?" Zuri's skepticism had vanished, replaced by wide-eyed wonder. "I sure did," Jackson confirmed, catching Amara's eye over the twins' heads. She was trying to maintain a straight face, but her eyes danced with amusement at the elaborate charade he'd orchestrated. "That was the queen dragon," Zuri decided, her imagination fully engaged now. "The one with the crown, like in your drawing." "Must have been," Jackson agreed solemnly. The boat tour continued with more sightings, and a stop at a small island where the twins discovered dragon treasures, colorful stones and shells that Jackson had arranged to have placed there that morning. By the time they returned to the marina, the twins were bubbling with stories about their adventure, already embellishing details in the way of all good storytellers. As they walked back to the car, Zuri slipped her hand into Jackson's. "That was the best surprise ever," she said quietly. "Better than the aquarium?" he asked. She considered this seriously. "Different, better. Both good." Jackson squeezed her small hand gently. "I'm glad you liked it. Will you make dragon surprises for us in Atlanta too?" The question was casual but loaded with meaning. "Absolutely," Jackson promised. "Atlanta has its own special dragons, you know. They're just waiting to be discovered." Zuri nodded, satisfied with this answer. "That's what I thought." Back at the hotel, The reality of their impending separation began to settle in. Tomorrow afternoon, Amara would take the twins back to Atlanta, back to their regular lives. Jackson would remain in Seattle, at least for now. The plans they'd discussed over breakfast were solid, but still theoretical. The practical and emotional distance remained. While the twins packed their treasures and souvenirs under Amara's supervision, Jackson stepped into the hallway to make a call he'd been avoiding. Vivian answered on the second ring. "Finally," she said, her tone a mixture of relief and irritation. "I was beginning to think you'd fallen off the face of the earth." "I'm sorry," Jackson said, and he meant it. "These past 2 days have been overwhelming." "I gathered that much. Those children, they're really yours." "Yes, twins. Zuri and Jabari. They're 5. A pause. "And you had no idea?" "None. Amara found out she was pregnant after she left. By then, things between us were—" He trailed off, unsure how to summarize the mess of hurt and misunderstanding that had characterized the end of his marriage. "Complicated," Vivian supplied. "So what happens now?" It was the question everyone kept asking, including himself. "I'm going to be part of their lives. I'm looking at opening an office in Atlanta, spending significant time there." Another longer pause. "I see." Jackson could hear what she wasn't saying. Their relationship had been comfortable, convenient, mutually beneficial. But it had never been the kind that could withstand this sort of seismic shift. They both knew it. "Vivian, It's okay, Jackson," she interrupted gently. "I understand. Your children have to come first. And this kind of long-distance arrangement isn't what either of us signed up for." The grace in her response made him feel both grateful and guilty. "You deserve better than this conversation happening over the phone." "Perhaps," she agreed. "But I appreciate your honesty. And for what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. Those children need their father." After they hung up, Jackson leaned against the wall, processing the end of a relationship that had been a significant part of his life for the past 8 months. Yet the loss felt strangely muted compared to the thought of being separated from the twins, even temporarily. When he returned to the hotel room, Amara was helping the twins organize their backpacks for the flight home. Jabari's stuffed sea otter kept escaping the confines of his bag, and Zuri was insisting that her dragon needed its own seat on the plane. "Everything okay?" Amara asked, noticing his expression. "Fine," Jackson assured her. "Just taking care of some business." She studied him for a moment but didn't press. "We were thinking of ordering room service for dinner. Last night in the hotel and all that." "Actually," Jackson said, "I had another idea, if you're up for it." Which is how they ended up in Jackson's penthouse that evening, the twins racing from room to room in wide-eyed exploration, while Amara stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, taking in the panoramic view of Seattle at sunset. "This is quite a place," she said as Jackson joined her. "It's just a space," he replied, seeing it through new eyes. "It never really felt like home." Amara glanced at him. "And what does feel like home?" Before he could answer, Jabari came running in from the guest room. "Daddy, your bathtub has jets in it. Can we take a bubble bath? Please." Jackson looked to Amara for permission. She nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "Just don't flood the bathroom, please." While the twins enjoyed what was surely the most elaborate bath of their young lives, complete with mountains of bubbles and the jets turned to the lowest setting, Jackson and Amara prepared a simple dinner in his rarely used kitchen. "I had my chef stock the refrigerator," Jackson explained as he pulled out ingredients. "I thought the kids might enjoy making their own pizzas." "You have a personal chef?" Amara raised an eyebrow as she washed vegetables at the sink. Jackson felt suddenly self-conscious about the trappings of wealth that had seemed so important yesterday. "For special occasions. Mostly I eat at restaurants or order in." Was all Amara said, but her expression spoke volumes. When the twins emerged from their bath, wrapped in oversized plush towels that made them look even smaller than they were, the pizza-making station was ready. Jackson had set out small bowls of toppings, cheese, vegetables, pepperoni, and prepared individual rounds of dough. "You can make any design you want," he explained as the twins climbed onto stools at the kitchen island. Jabari immediately began piling toppings haphazardly on his dough, while Zuri approached the task with artistic precision, creating a careful pattern with bell peppers and olives. "Mine's a dragon pizza," Jabari announced, though the resemblance to any known creature was questionable at best. "Very dragon-like," Jackson agreed seriously. "And what about yours, Zuri?" "It's a flower garden," she explained, placing a final piece of yellow pepper in the center of a red pepper bloom. "It's beautiful," Jackson said, genuinely impressed by her attention to detail. As they ate their creations at the dining table, a space that had previously hosted business dinners and the occasional formal date, but never a family meal, Jackson found himself memorizing every detail. The way Jabari talked with his mouth full despite Amara's gentle reminders. The careful way Zuri cut her pizza into precise bites. The easy rhythm of family conversation, something his expensive apartment had never witnessed before. After dinner, as the sky darkened outside the windows, Jackson brought out a surprise he'd had delivered that afternoon. A telescope, set up on the balcony. "Who wants to look at the stars?" he asked. The twins' enthusiasm was immediate and loud. Even Amara looked intrigued as they stepped onto the balcony. The night was clear, unusual for Seattle, with stars visible despite the city lights. Jackson adjusted the telescope, finding the moon first, an easy target that filled the twins with wonder when they took turns looking. "It has holes in it," Jabari exclaimed. "Craters," Zuri corrected, always the precise one. "From meteors." Jackson helped them find other celestial objects. Venus, bright in the evening sky, the Pleiades star cluster, and even a passing satellite that moved steadily across their field of view. "Make a wish," Jabari shouted, mistaking it for a shooting star. They all closed their eyes obediently. Jackson didn't need to wonder what the others were wishing for. It was written on their faces, in the way the twins kept looking between their parents, in the careful distance Amara maintained even as they shared this moment. Later, after the twins had fallen asleep in the guest room, Jabari sprawled diagonally across the bed, Zuri curled neatly on her side. Jackson and Amara sat in the living room with glasses of wine. "Thank you for today," Amara said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "They'll remember this trip forever." "I hope so," Jackson replied. "I want to give them more days like this. Not just the fancy stuff, the telescope and the boat tour, but the normal moments too. Making pizza, reading bedtime stories." Amara nodded. "Those are the moments that matter most." "I'm flying to Atlanta next week," Jackson said, the decision crystallizing as he spoke, "to look at office spaces and houses. I want to be settled there before they start school in the fall." Amara's eyes widened slightly. "That's fast. I've missed 5 years, Amara. I don't want to miss any more time than necessary." She studied him over the rim of her wine glass. "And your company? Your life here? The company will adapt. As for my life," he gestured around the elegant but sterile apartment. "What life? I built all this to prove something to myself, to you, to the world. But it's empty. It always has been." "And what about us?" Amara asked quietly. "Where do we fit in this new arrangement?" It was the question that had been hovering unspoken between them since the moment at the airport. Jackson chose his words carefully. "I think we start as co-parents. Focus on giving Zuri and Jabari the stability and love they deserve. And then, we see where that leads." Amara nodded slowly. "That seems reasonable. But I want you to know something," Jackson continued, meeting her gaze directly. "I never stopped loving you. Even when I was angry, even when I told myself I hated you for leaving. Underneath all that, I still loved you. I probably always will." Amara's expression softened. "Jackson, you don't need to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I'm not asking for promises or commitments. I'm just being honest. These past 2 days have shown me what's really important. And whatever happens between us, I want it to be built on truth this time." Amara was quiet for a long moment. "The truth is complicated," she said finally. "I left because I was hurt and angry about Melanie. But part of me always regretted not fighting harder for what we had. When I found out I was pregnant, I called you because I still believed we could fix things. And I shut you out, Jackson said, the familiar guilt washing over him. We both made mistakes, Amara acknowledged. But maybe we can do better this time. For them. She glanced toward the guest room where the twins slept, and Jackson followed her gaze. Through the partially open door, he could see Jabari's foot hanging off the edge of the bed, Zuri's arm flung over her brother in sleep. Their children. The miracle he hadn't known existed until 2 days ago. For them, he agreed. And maybe for us too. The morning of departure arrived with a Seattle rarity. Bright sunshine streaming through the penthouse windows. Jackson woke early, the reality of the day ahead sitting heavy in his chest. In just a few hours, Amara would take the twins back to Atlanta, back to their regular lives. The thought of being separated from them, even temporarily, created a physical ache he hadn't anticipated. He found Zuri already awake, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor with her stuffed dragon in her lap. She looked up as he entered, her expression serious. "Good morning," Jackson said softly, not wanting to wake Jabari or Amara. "You're up early." Zuri nodded. "I wanted to see the sunrise. Grandma says that's when the world is most magical." Jackson sat beside her on the floor, touched by this glimpse into her inner world. "Your grandma sounds very wise." "She is," Zuri agreed solemnly. "She says I'm an old soul like her." Jackson studied his daughter's face, the thoughtful eyes, the slight furrow between her brows that appeared when she was contemplating something important. He could see traces of Amara in her features, but also his mother, especially around the eyes. "Can I ask you something, Daddy?" Zuri's voice was barely above a whisper. "Anything. Are you really coming to Atlanta? Or is that just a story to make us feel better about leaving?" The question hit Jackson like a physical blow. How many disappointments had this 5-year-old already experienced to make her so wary of adult promises? "It's not a story," he said firmly. "I'm really coming. In fact, I've already booked my flight for next Tuesday." Zuri's eyes widened slightly. "That's only 4 days after we leave." "Exactly. And I've set up appointments with real estate agents to look at houses, and meetings with people about opening my company's office there. So you can be near us?" "So I can be with you," Jackson corrected gently. "Being your dad isn't something I want to do from far away. I want to be there for breakfast before school and bedtime stories and Saturday morning cartoons." Zuri considered this, her small fingers absently stroking the purple dragon's plush scales. "Jabari will be happy. He talks about you all the time, even before we met you. He made up stories about the adventures you were having." "And what about you?" Jackson asked. "Will you be happy if I move to Atlanta?" Zuri met his gaze directly, her eyes so much older than her years. "I want to be. But I'm scared." "Of what, sweetheart?" "That you'll change your mind. That you'll decide being a dad is too hard or not fun enough. That you'll leave again." "Again?" Jackson repeated, confused. "Zuri, I never left you. I didn't know about you and Jabari until 2 days ago." Zuri shrugged, a gesture so reminiscent of Amara that it made his heart ache. "But you left Mommy. And that's why we didn't have you." The simple logic of a child, cutting straight to the heart of adult complications. Jackson chose his next words carefully. "What happened between your mom and me was very complicated, and we both made mistakes. But I promise you this. Now that I know about you and Jabari, nothing could make me leave. Being your dad isn't something I would ever walk away from." Zuri studied his face, searching for truth in a way that reminded him of Amara. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, but you have to pinky promise." She held out her tiny finger solemnly. Jackson linked his much larger pinky with hers. "I pinky promise. I'm coming to Atlanta to be with you and Jabari." The ritual complete, Zuri's expression lightened. "Can we have pancakes for breakfast? The ones you made yesterday were better than the hotel ones." "Absolutely," Jackson agreed, grateful for the shift to simpler territory. "Let's go see what we can find in the kitchen." By the time Amara and Jabari woke, Jackson and Zuri had created a pancake assembly line. Zuri stood on a step stool at the counter, carefully measuring ingredients while Jackson manned the stove. The kitchen smelled of butter and vanilla. "Something smells amazing," Amara said, Jabari trailing sleepily behind her. "Daddy and I are making breakfast," Zuri announced proudly. "I'm the measuring expert." "And a very good one," Jackson confirmed, flipping a perfectly golden pancake. Jabari perked up immediately at the sight of food. "Can I help too?" "You can set the table," Zuri instructed, clearly enjoying her role as kitchen assistant. "The plates are in that cabinet." As they moved around the kitchen and dining area, preparing for their last meal together before the flight, Jackson was struck by how natural it felt. This impromptu family breakfast in his usually empty apartment felt more right than any business success or material acquisition ever had. Over breakfast, they discussed logistics. Jackson would drive them to the airport. He'd already arranged for his assistant to ship the twins' new treasures, the telescope, the stuffed animals too bulky for carry-on luggage, to Atlanta. He'd be there himself in 4 days. "I'll text you my flight details," he told Amara. "If you're comfortable with it, I'd love for you and the twins to meet me at the airport." "I think that could be arranged," Amara replied with a small smile. "They're getting pretty good at airport greetings." The twins giggled at this, the tension of the upcoming separation momentarily forgotten. All too soon, it was time to leave for the airport. The twins made a final inspection of the guest room to ensure no treasures were left behind. Amara packed the last few items into their carry-on bags. Jackson stood in the living room, suddenly reluctant to start the journey that would end with goodbye. Amara approached him while the twins were distracted. "This is hard for them," she said quietly. "They've just found you, and now they have to leave you." "It's hard for me too," Jackson admitted. "I keep reminding myself it's just for a few days, but it feels like more," Amara finished for him. "I understand. Just be gentle with them at the airport. Quick goodbyes are probably best." Jackson nodded, grateful for her guidance in this unfamiliar territory of parenting. "I'll follow your lead." The drive to the airport was filled with the twins' chatter as they pointed out landmarks they recognized from their explorations of the city. Jackson tried to focus on their excitement rather than the heaviness in his chest. At the departures terminal, Jackson found a parking spot rather than using the drop-off lane. He wanted every possible minute with them, even if it meant just walking through the airport. Check-in was efficient, if emotional. Jackson carried Jabari on his shoulders through the terminal while Zuri held tightly to his hand. Amara managed the luggage, occasionally catching Jackson's eye with a look that conveyed understanding of his struggle. Too soon, they reached the security checkpoint, the point beyond which Jackson couldn't accompany them. He knelt down to the twins' level, bracing himself for the goodbye. "Remember, it's just for a few days," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "I'll be in Atlanta on Tuesday." Jabari threw his arms around Jackson's neck. "Promise you'll call tonight, and tomorrow night, and the next night." "Every night," Jackson assured him, holding his son close. "And you can call me anytime you want. Mommy has my number." Zuri waited for her brother to release Jackson before stepping forward for her own hug. "Don't forget the pinky promise," she whispered in his ear. "Never," he whispered back, giving her an extra squeeze. Standing, Jackson faced Amara. Their relationship status might be complicated, but in this moment, they were united in their love for the two small people between them. "Safe travels," he said, unsure of the appropriate goodbye for their unique situation. Amara surprised him by stepping forward and embracing him briefly. "See you Tuesday," she said as she pulled away. "We'll be waiting at baggage claim." Jackson watched as they made their way through security, the twins turning repeatedly to wave until they were out of sight. The emptiness that followed was immediate and overwhelming. He stood rooted to the spot long after they'd disappeared, other travelers flowing around him like a river around a stone. Finally, he turned and walked back to his car, already counting the hours until Tuesday. The next 4 days passed in a blur of activity. Jackson threw himself into preparations for his move with the same intensity he usually reserved for business acquisitions. He held video conferences with his executive team, explaining his decision to relocate to Atlanta and establish the East Coast headquarters there rather than in New York as originally planned. Most accepted the change with professional equanimity. A few expressed surprise at the personal nature of his decision. His CFO, Marcus, who had been with him since the early days, was the only one who commented directly. "This is about the kids, isn't it?" he asked after the others had signed off from their video call. "Yes," Jackson admitted. "I have twins, a boy and a girl. They're 5. Marcus's eyebrows shot up. "That's unexpected. Congratulations, I think." "Definitely congratulations," Jackson confirmed. "It's complicated, but they're amazing, and I need to be where they are." Marcus nodded slowly. "I've known you a long time, Jackson. I've seen you chase deals, chase money, chase success. But I've never seen you look as certain about anything as you do right now. Because nothing has ever mattered more," Jackson replied simply. Each evening, he video-called the twins as promised. They showed him their bedroom in Atlanta, a cheerful space with twin beds, one side decorated with dinosaurs for Jabari, the other with stars and moons for Zuri. They introduced him to their cat, a plump orange tabby named Mango who regarded the camera with supreme indifference. They told him about their friends, their school, their favorite playground. With each call, Jackson's resolve strengthened. This wasn't just about fulfilling an obligation or easing his guilt. This was about becoming part of their world, their daily lives, their future. On Monday night, his last evening in Seattle, Jackson walked through his penthouse with new eyes. The space that had once represented his success now felt hollow, a showcase rather than a home. He'd arranged for most of it to be sold or put in storage. The few personal items that mattered would come with him to Atlanta. His phone rang. Amara, not their usual video call with the twins. "Everything okay?" he asked immediately. "Fine," she assured him. "The kids are already asleep. They were so excited about tomorrow they wore themselves out." "I can relate," Jackson admitted. "I've been packed since yesterday." Amara laughed softly. "That doesn't sound like the Jackson I remember. You used to throw things in a bag 5 minutes before leaving for the airport." "People change," he said. "Sometimes they need a good reason." "And you have 2 very good reasons now," Amara replied, her voice warm. "The best," Jackson agreed. "But that's not actually why I called. I wanted to talk to you about the house hunting." Jackson had scheduled viewings of several properties in Atlanta, focusing on neighborhoods near the twin school and Amara's home. "What about it?" "I've been thinking about what makes the most sense for the kids. For them to have consistency, to not feel pulled between 2 homes." "Jackson," Amara's voice held a note of caution. "If you're suggesting what I think you're suggesting, just hear me out," he interrupted gently. "I'm not proposing we get back together romantically. I'm talking about a practical arrangement. The house next door to yours is for sale. My real estate agent sent me the listing today. The Henderson's place? They're moving to Florida to be near their grandchildren." "Exactly. It would give the twins consistency, same neighborhood, same friends. They could move easily between both homes without it feeling like a major transition. And we could co-parent more effectively if we're literally next door to each other." Amara was quiet for a moment. "That's actually not a terrible idea. Try not to sound so surprised," Jackson said dryly. "It's just very different from the Jackson I knew, who wanted the biggest house on the highest hill. Like I said, people change." He paused. "So you're okay with me looking at the Henderson place?" "Yes," Amara said. "It makes sense for the kids. And it would be nice to have help nearby. Single parenting isn't easy." "You won't be doing it alone anymore," Jackson promised. "I meant what I said to Zuri and Jabari. I'm all in on this dad thing." The next day, as his plane began its descent into Atlanta, Jackson felt a strange mixture of nervousness and certainty. The city spread out below him, his new home, not because of business opportunity or strategic advantage, but because it was where his children lived. As promised, Amara and the twins were waiting at baggage claim. Jackson spotted them immediately, Jabari bouncing on his toes, Zuri holding a handmade sign that read, "Welcome Daddy," in carefully formed letters decorated with glitter and stickers. The moment they saw him, both twins broke free from Amara and ran toward him. Jackson knelt and opened his arms, bracing himself as they collided with him in a tangle of limbs and excited voices. "You really came," Jabari exclaimed, as if he couldn't quite believe it despite the promises. "I really did," Jackson confirmed, holding them both close, "just like I said I would." Over their heads, his eyes met Amara's. She was watching them with a soft expression he hadn't seen in years. Not quite love, not yet, but something like hope. As they walked to the parking garage, the twins between them chattering about all the things they wanted to show him in Atlanta, Jackson felt a sense of rightness that had eluded him for years. His life had been derailed at that airport in Seattle, his carefully constructed plans shattered in an instant. And he couldn't be more grateful, because sometimes the most precious things in life come from the moments when our plans fall apart. Sometimes what looks like an ending is really just the beginning of a better story. If you've ever had your life change in an instant, if you've ever had your carefully laid plans completely upended by something unexpected, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. Those moments that seem like disasters often turn out to be doorways to something better than we could have imagined. Jackson thought he was flying his ex in to finalize their divorce and get his revenge. Instead, he discovered he was a father. And in that discovery, he found something far more valuable than success or vindication. He found his way home. If this story touched something in you, if you believe in second chances and the power of love to heal old wounds, I'd love for you to join me for more stories like this one. Stories about life's unexpected turns and the beauty that can come from them. Just hit subscribe, and let's explore these consequential moments together. I will see you in the next one.